Hey everyone, this week I got an update on the KDP-C milestones for the Gateway and for Starship HLS. There was a couple of picture dumps from Exploration Ground Systems on solid rocket booster processing for Artemis II and for the emergency egress system testing out at Pad 39B. There was also an RS-25 test, and the ASAP annual report was released, and it had a few things to say about Artemis in that long report. And so we'll be taking a look at that coming up here this week. So I got one of the first things that I got last week was a useful update from public affairs or via public affairs about the key decision point C milestone for both the Gateway co-manifested vehicle and the HLS option A, which is the SpaceX Starship HLS, the initial lunar lander that will support Artemis III. And so basically what NASA's saying here, and I'll go through this, I'll go through these bullet points in the statement that I got. But basically what it means is that both programs and both initial capabilities have been approved to move into Phase C of the agency's project lifecycle. And so I'll just read this. So NASA has approved both the initial Gateway capability, consisting of the integrated power and propulsion element and habitation and logistics outpost, or HALO, and the initial human landing system capability, which is again Starship HLS, to move from formulation to implementation as a part of the key decision point C milestone in the agency's project life cycle management process. The agency will release the cost and schedule baselines with the materials for the president's budget request. And so what they're referring to there is, what's euphemistically referred to as the president's budget, and this will be for fiscal year 2025. So that the fiscal year starts on October 1st of this year, and but the budget cycle goes on for a long time, and the president's proposed budget is released early in the year. It's usually released in February, so that should be coming up pretty soon. And then Congress will have hearings, and then they will mark up their own appropriations bills using the president's budget. Sometimes using the president's budget as an outline for that, and sometimes mostly ignoring it, depending on the political makeup of the executive branch and legislative branch. But anyway, so what the point here is that those important cost and schedule baselines, which are called an agency baseline commitment to stakeholders like Congress and the president, those should be released with the fiscal year 2025 president's budget request, hopefully again in the next month or so. There is a qualifier to the schedule. The baselines are not the agency's target launch dates for Artemis missions, and they include cost and schedule reserves to account for a variety of possible risks beyond the program's control. The baselines are used by Congress to track NASA's performance on major projects and are conservative statistical calculations based on similar large-scale projects in the agency's history. Well, that's true, but the target launch dates are similarly lean the other way. They tend to be what are euphemistically referred to as green light schedules, or in some cases motorcade schedules, where typically if you're driving from one place to another, you have to stop for red lights, and or check for oncoming traffic. And so a green light schedule is assuming that there will be no red lights, which is not particularly realistic. And then the motorcade schedule is the one where you have a large escort and can basically move at at incredibly fast speed, and neither of those are often realistic. So basically, what we're being cautioned here about is that the launch dates or the schedule baseline is probably going to be later than these dates. We don't really have one for the Gateway at this point because the Gateway was supposed to be September 2025 launch and then arrival in NRHO a year later. And then same, for HLS, the crude demo, that was supposed to that would obviously have to occur before the Artemis III launch, which is currently scheduled for September 2026. But that's I would say it's because the baselines will have reserves, they can often be viewed as more realistic than these target dates. And in particular, the Artemis III target launch date is challenging, I guess, is one way of putting it. Optimistic is another. And so often the thing about historical statistics and being conservative is that especially for projects like this where you're doing something for the first time, incorporating a historical margin in the schedule reserve is more realistic than thinking that you're going to be able to move through your milestones at motorcade speed. So anyway, the KDP-C milestone, one of the things that was indicated in a follow-up was that the approval and the KDP-C, the decision to move into into phase C for both of these occurred at the end of the calendar year, at the end of 2023. So those are definitely good program milestones for both Gateway, CMV, and for Starship HLS, looking ahead to those supporting future Artemis missions. The Gateway would support Artemis IV, and Starship HLS would support Artemis III. So this is B-roll video that NASA Public Affairs released last week, showing work that was done about a month ago. Again, this is all courtesy of NASA. This is something that they release. This is where it's released from, the images.nasa.gov. And so this is, I believe this is all shot in the rotation in the RPSF at Kennedy Space Center. As it said, this is offload of segments from the rail cars. You can see the clamshell rail cars here in the lower left, and then one of these center segments on the right. And this is in the rotation building of the RPSF. The facility consists of this is the main building where work's done in the rotation building, but then you have two storage buildings, which they call surge, and those were more important during shuttle when they had a higher flight rate. Shuttle had 8 segments. These have 10 segments. You can see one of the segments obviously to the left, which has already been put in an inspection stand, and they're showing again. You can see the rail car canister over on the right in that previous shot. And they're basically getting ready to break this segment over from its horizontal transportation orientation to a vertical orientation for for how it will be stored, and then these segments will eventually obviously be stacked in a vertical orientation. So in talking with somebody from Exploration Ground Systems recently, again, this video is shot in just before Christmas. All 10 segments have been offloaded from the rail cars at this point. This was obviously a month ago when they were still doing that work. 6 of the 10 segments are in the Surge, the Surge 2 building. The 2 aft assemblies are also in this rotation building, and we'll see them. They would be off to the right from this point of view. We'll see them here in a little bit. And then the 2 center segments are also in the rotation building, and they have a little bit of processing to do before they will be moved over to Surge. And pretty soon the segments will be ready for stacking, and they'll essentially just wait until NASA is ready to start stacking the Artemis II vehicle. So I'm going to sort of skip ahead here a little bit so you can see this. This looks like one of the center segments. Let me pause for a moment. Based on the graphic. So let's see if I can bring this up here. Right. So here's the graphic, and you can see they've labeled they've reversed the notation from shuttle. Again, I'm not sure that's the notation used within the program. So, but what we're probably looking at in here, based on this pattern, is the center segment, and those are the ones that will get the NASA worm logo on them. And that's the quote unquote new segment for the 5 segment boosters. Shuttle basically omitted this and had a 4 segment SRB with the forward segment, forward center using shuttle notation, aft center, and then aft segment with build up into an aft assembly, which includes the aft skirt, the nozzle extension, and then the in this case for SLS, the core stage attach ring and the lower attach struts. Okay, so now you can see to the right here, you can see one of the, I think they have them, as I'd mentioned before, the right hand aft assembly is on the left build-up stand is where they are right now. And then the left hand one is on the right build-up stand. So let's see if let me back up a little bit. So they're moving this over, and so you can see again, so this is the right hand. Let's see if I got this right. Yes, the right hand aft assembly and the left hand aft assembly, backwards, so to speak. And so they're moving this over to I forget if they call these. I want to say they were called slap stands, but that might not be. They're basically doing inspections of the segments to make sure that they're still as specified after transportation. And then this is a time lapse of that same thing. And again, you can see the booster, you can see the aft assemblies in the right here, on the right hand side of the picture. A fairly typical 2 crane breakover operation. And so this is a breakover, again, rotating. That's why it's rotation. So they're rotating the segments from horizontal to vertical. And so the top 4 segments of each booster, for a total of 8, they are offloaded from the rail cars like this. They're rotated to vertical. They do inspections as they were doing inspections in the horizontal, and then they do some more inspections in the vertical. And then most of the segments are are moved over to the surge to one of the surge buildings for storage until they're needed for stacking. The aft assemblies are the first ones offloaded, and after inspections, they go straight into the build-up stands because the aft segments, there's a lot of hardware and a lot of work to outfit those to go from an aft assembly to an aft, or to go from an aft segment to an aft assembly. At the end of the week, Public Affairs at Kennedy Space Center also released a set of pictures of additional preparations to begin testing of the emergency egress system. These pictures were taken on January 24th, so in the middle of the week. And these are obviously up on the launch umbilical tower, or the mobile launcher umbilical tower. And this is the first basket that is being set up on the slide wires that will run from this point here on the mobile launcher down to the terminus area. And these would be used in an emergency. So they're beginning. You can see the 4 lines in the upper, in the middle, and then the upper right part of the photo. And so in this shot, they've positioned the first basket up on the, I believe it's the 274 foot level of the mobile launcher, and you can see down there in the sort of the those blue lanes off in the distance that's the terminus area where the baskets will stop and allow personnel to get out and go down into a bunker area for some emergencies. And so this is the first basket, and the intent is going to be to do an initial set of tests on the first basket, and then once they've got through that, then they'll go through the other 3 baskets. So these are they're still in the sort of contractor, the construction contractor, which I believe is JP Donovan, is doing the initial setup of this, and then NASA Exploration Ground Systems and their prime contractor, the Comet contractor, Jacobs Technology, they will then go through their own verification and validation testing sequence out at the pad. This is obviously pad 39B. You can see through the in the background there, you can see the vehicle assembly building way off in the distance. And these are just, you can, again, this is a nice shot framing the basket, and then you can see where the basket will run on the slide wires down there to the leftmost, the left lane in the terminus area. And then this is a shot as they're setting this first basket up on the mobile launcher. And then this gives you an idea of it running down. They have not actually, they were actually getting ready to start doing tests of releasing the baskets and letting them run, with a control system. And so these tests were just initial positioning of the basket and running it manually up and down the lines. And so now we're looking at ground level down at the edge of the pad infield. This would be on the west side of the launch pad 39B infield. And so I believe that's the set right there. And so then this is another shot back up with the basket kind of in a starting position. This is the way the baskets will be staged for launch day, and obviously they don't want to have to use them. But there's a lot of this is basically preparation to begin doing to test the system and make sure that it's going to work, and ahead of supporting crewed launches from Pad 39B again. The RS-25 test on January 23rd was the 5th in this final sequence in the Retrofit 3B test series, which is the final planned series, as a part of certifying the restart of production of this engine. It's not just, it is mostly production restart, but it is also new SLS operating requirements, and also specific requirements for the engine as well. So the test was conducted on January 23rd, and as I said, this was the 5th test in this series. The first one was on October 17th, and it ran 500 seconds being kind of the standard operating procedure. That's a full duty cycle for SLS. It has a little margin on the end, but 500 seconds is kind of the duty cycle for the engine. And so the first test was a little longer than that. The third test in the series was a lot longer than that, to demonstrate the engine's ability to be gimbaled, especially with some of the new 3D printed hardware on the engine. Let me see if I can pull that up. These are some examples of additive manufacturing, or 3D printing is another way of putting it. So the what's numbered here is number 5 is a fuel duct, and those have to flex, when the engine is gimbaled. So the gimbaling tests that were done on the third test on November 29th. Let me see if I can pull the engine does not have the capability to gimbal itself. It does not have the hydraulics. The thrust vector control is provided by the core stage, or the orbiter for shuttle. And so in this case, also the test stand has the hydraulics, not just for engine operation, but also for thrust vector control. But the engine has to be able to obviously work in that environment and continue to operate and respond to commands from the engine controller, which is a part of the engine. And so that test, a lot of the gimbling, there may be another test in the series later on, but that's the only test of the 5 so far that had gimbling in it. And then there are the 2 tests that have been conducted in the last basically week and a half. The first one on January 17th, and then the one in this last week on the 23rd. So this is again, this is footage from the test. During this test, we saw a little bit more gimbling. A little bit more throttling of the engine, but not as much as in some of the other tests. So I'm kind of jumping through here to see if I can find. There's a actually, I'm trying to see if I can find it. There was, right here. There is a small throttle bucket where the engine's running around either 111 or 113% right now. You can see the engine throttle back for a few seconds and then throttle back up. And that's similar to the type of quote unquote throttle bucket, which you'd see if you were plotting the thrust level versus time. That's the kind of thing you'd see, for instance, for they call this for SLS, call it the bolt bucket. The first 8 SLS launches will use space shuttle solid rocket booster case hardware. And those bolts and the way that they attach to the forward end of the core, to the thrust beam that runs through the core stage intertank, as the boosters thrust tails off, there's a short period of time before, during, after the solid rocket booster separation where the engines are throttled down for a short period of time, down to, if I recall correctly, 95%, and then they throttle back up to full power. And so that's what we were looking at there, was that it was that very short bucket. And that is a feature of some of these ground tests, but not always. And so, but that was a little bit different than the test on January 17th. Okay, so we're taking a look at the shutdown sequence this time, which Stennis showed for this last test, test number 5 on the 23rd. So you can see here, I have it paused. You can see that the engine is running at about 80%. This is going to be the minimum power level for the production restart engines, which will start flying on Artemis 5. So the engine's going to shut down at 500 seconds, and you can see that the engine's in shutdown. You can already see the helium purges, the coming through the nozzle. You can see that that's pushing out quite a bit of fuel and oxidizer, and that there's still some combustion going on. And they talk about the engines, even after the shutdown command, it takes a little while for the engines to go to what's called zero thrust, because there's still some residual combustion that goes on. So engine's already shut down, but you can still see there's combustion going on as all of the residual hydrogen and oxygen is purged out of the power heads. And so now the engine's sort of reached that zero thrust point. And so it takes several seconds to do this, and that's part of this shutdown purge that you'd see if they show the shutdown during live coverage of these tests. But you can see the helium purge that's going on. Helium remains in a gaseous state at liquid hydrogen temperatures, and part of this is, again, they're trying to get as much moisture and obviously residual propellant. And so another reason that they want to do this is since you can still see there's combustion going on because there's still hydrogen and oxygen that's being pushed out of the engine, that they want to get that all out of there so that you couldn't have some hydrogen gas build up and then pop, and that obviously could damage engine components if that were to happen. Another test was conducted today, January 27th. Unfortunately, NASA Communications provided almost no warning that this test was going to be conducted. It is a Saturday, so I don't know if Public Affairs even has the funding to operate on a Saturday, but obviously the test team was working today. There was one set of social media posts made at the end of the test on Tuesday, but that was the only notification provided of this test that I'm aware of, and it's unfortunate because it's almost discouraging us from covering activities like this. And so I wasn't even aware that this test occurred today until after it occurred. It appears that, skipping around here, it appears that the test was another 500-second test. Let's see if I haven't really had a chance to look and see, just kind of jumping around in the live stream here. Yep, it was a 500-second test. So I really haven't had a chance to take a look at this test yet. in general, NASA doesn't really provide a lot of details about these tests. And so there's no live commentary. There's a pre-recorded message that they play at the front of the streams, but that's often not updated for the particular test. So for instance, on the test on Tuesday, they cited a 550-second duration for that test, but that was not the case for the Tuesday test either. So anyway, this was the 6th test in the series, it appears. The Aerospace Safety Advisory Panel released their annual report this last week, and the panel reviews work done by across the agency, so not just Artemis, but the aeronautics and space operations and science mission directorates and all the directorates, but in particular the human spaceflight programs. And specific to Artemis, there are a couple of themes that the report underscores, and these are things that have been, these are themes or storylines that are not new and will continue to be storylines this year and next year and into the future. One of them was the how ambitious the Artemis III mission will be. They talk about, you can see here, the concern is, as I say, the aggressive launch timeline combined with the number of firsts. They say that, in looking at this, in some concluding paragraphs, one of the things that they say is there will be extraordinary pressure for timely execution of a schedule that in many ways is beyond NASA's full control, and at a level of integration risk that will challenge the workforce to the extreme. Therefore, the ASAP does advise NASA to consider a redistribution of Artemis mission content across the individual missions to ensure that the overall integrated risks are at a level that the NASA workforce can effectively manage without undue schedule pressure. Well, this has obviously been something that has been discussed certainly in the last year. As noted in the New Year's video, there's been a lot of talk about when Artemis III could fly, but also what the content of that mission could be or should be, and those are at least hinted at here. In this case, it's not talking necessarily so much about availability of hardware as, it's related, but that they're going to do this all on the third Artemis mission, the third integrated Artemis mission with Orion and SLS and ground systems to launch them, but then now also adding the lunar lander, human landing system, which is Starship HLS, and then the Axiom spacesuits. And they're going to launch all of those and integrate all of those before launch on just the third mission, and this will obviously only be the second crewed mission. So they're obviously expressing some level of concern about that. So another area that they talk about is in this section below, the Artemis ongoing concerns about the campaign. And one of the things that they talk about is an irregular cadence of flights. And this is something that this is another one of those themes or storylines that that I've highlighted. I wrote a story about this last year, talking about how there aren't a lot of options in terms of addressing this irregular cadence in the near future. What the ASAP says is, now that the agency has a well-defined set of Moon to Mars objectives, the panel encourages NASA to factor the consequences of a low launch cadence into its overall risk calculus to achieve desired outcomes and to consider how those risks might be rebalanced. Given NASA's expected level of congressional support, at least one Artemis launch per year offers the NASA community their best opportunity to learn, train, develop, and adapt to future discoveries and evolving requirements of the overall campaign, as every mission builds upon the missions that came before. This is another one of those long-term concerns, and as I said, I wrote about this. I wrote about some of the considerations last year. The fundamental problem is that Artemis has not progressed far enough to fly regularly or that much. Artemis doesn't have the operational flight hardware to do that. The Orion and SLS designs might be more mature than the other programs, but they don't have an inventory of spacecraft and rockets to fly. SpaceX, for example, has a lot of hardware, but it's still being prototyped. So we have some hardware that can fly to the moon, but not that often, and some hardware that is being flight tested often, but isn't ready yet to fly to the moon. And so in this situation, it's not likely that Artemis, or Moon to Mars, will be able to sustain a regular cadence of missions in this decade, and may not be able to demonstrate an annual cadence until the 2030s. And in contrast to previous occasions where ASAP had noted this to Congress, Congress now is not in a position to write a bigger check, at least not at the present time. And it's questionable when that might be possible again. Again, as I noted in that story last year, Congress had extended the SLS Block 1 operations by buying essentially 2 more vehicles in 2018. And they did that at the expense of the upgrades that they were planning for SLS, the Block 1B, and then the Bolay boosters, which are going to be Block 2 now. So they weren't, even in that case in 2018, even though they were able to buy 2 more vehicles, they were not able to fly those missions in parallel with the exploration upper stage / Block 1B schedule. So even though they weren't just adding those missions, they were inserting them into the timeline and pushing EUS, essentially delaying the initial capability, the initial missions of Block 1B. And now Block 1B is now pushed out to the end of this decade at minimum. And so that was part of the story, was the choice of, do you want to, if you want to add another Block 1 vehicle and fly it, do you want to do that at the expense of delaying Block 1B even further? And that's one of these problems, which is that NASA is not in a position to do both at the same time. So ideally, you would be able to fly more Block 1 missions and bring EUS and Block 1B online in that September 2028 timeframe. But it does not seem to be feasible right now for Congress to write a big enough check to make something like that happen. So right now, since what they've chosen is to hold the Artemis 4 schedule and hold Block 1B development as a high priority, and only fly 2 missions between now and then, Artemis II and Artemis III. Also, just worth noting that starting to do some reporting of some of this Artemis news that is harder to report in sort of longhand written form. I am still working for NASAspaceflight.com, and I am planning on publishing stories, publishing with NASAspaceflight.com, these stories based on when we get an opportunity to interview NASA and contractor officials about what's going on with the different Artemis programs, EGS, Orion, SLS, HLS, Gateway, spacesuits, XEVA. If we can get details on things, then that gives me the opportunity to do detailed reporting, a detailed written story. And so recently, we published this story on the 19th about exploration upper stage development. This is a part of the a series of stories that I wrote based on a visit to the Machute Assembly Facility in New Orleans in October. And coming up, hopefully in the next handful of weeks, as I mentioned, I spoke with somebody from Exploration Ground Systems about booster processing to get those ready for stacking, and then also the slidewire baskets, so the emergency egress system testing going on out at Pad 39B, and just talking about where they are a couple of weeks after Artemis II was delayed from the end of 2024 to September 2025, and trying to get a feel for all of that. And so we'll be reporting NASAspaceflight.com will be reporting that hopefully in the next couple of weeks. And so that's something else to look for. And in the meantime, there's only so much you can cover in a written story. And so there's, again, these pictures are all courtesy of NASA. This video is all courtesy of NASA. And we use, NASA Spaceflight uses some of this and some of their own material. And so, for these video updates, I'm concentrating on the type of news that when in cases where NASA isn't saying much with the video or won't say anything, then there is still news to report. So odds and ends like B-roll video like this, or the ASAP annual report. I'm not sure if we'll be getting any statements from NASA about that. And so we'll continue to cover these types of developments here. And then as we get the opportunity to interview people about what's going on, we'll do stories like this on exploration upper stage development and production at Machute Assembly Facility, and then also talking about RPSF work. When we are able to interview, then we'll use we won't necessarily use B-roll footage, but we will use some stills and things like that in written stories. So that's about it for this week. Thanks for watching, and hope to see you again soon. We're still waiting for updates on the Orion issues from NASA. So hopefully we might get something in the next couple of weeks. We'll be on the lookout for more picture dumps from Kennedy Space Center and Exploration Ground Systems, or from the SLS program, processing the Artemis II hardware, Artemis III hardware, and so on. And so when we get new information, I will come back and we'll do another one of these videos.